What do you swear you saw but have no proof? When I was 10, we had a 14-year-old German Shepherd who was getting very sick. I was home alone momentarily as my mom went to the neighbors to pick up a book or something. Our German Shepherd came over, convinced me to walk outside with him and started licking my hands, looked at me, and ran away jumping the fence, and he never came back. He was so loyal and good that to this day, Noon believes me and thinks he was stolen because he would never leave. I'm almost certain he did that because he didn't want us to see him die, and he wanted to go to the massive forest area and do his thing. I miss you, buddy. Commenter. He went off to die alone. Dogs do that. We had a dog that we couldn't find as well one day. We have a pretty big garden. When we found her at last, she lay dead in a corner of the property, on top of the place where we'd buried her mother and grandfather. The dog doesn't leave to die alone. It leaves to die so that smell of their remains doesn't bring predators, scavengers home. It's a final act of lifetime of devotion. Story 2. I was staying for a week at a guest house on some property up in the middle of nowhere, Washington State. I'm sitting on the porch early in the morning drinking a cup of coffee, and I see a young deer in the yard about 20 yards from me. So I just stay still and take it in. Then along comes this rabbit hopping in, and they notice each other. The rabbit hops up toward the deer, and the deer cautiously puts its nose toward the rabbit. The rabbit gets up on its hind legs, and they slowly inch their noses closer and closer to each other. Then they touch, and the deer hops straight up in the air. The rabbit runs in a full circle around the deer and then stops. Then they repeated the exact same thing. They did this like 3 times, then ran back into the woods together. This was before cell phones, and I'm glad it was. It was just something for me and me only, and I'm grateful for it. Story 3. When I was a kid, I'd sometimes get up in the middle of the night and go downstairs to get a drink or snack. On the way, I had to pass by this dark hallway that led to my dad's office. I was always scared to look down that hallway at night because I had this fear that I was going to see a small child standing there. I have no idea where the thought came from, outside of my hyperactive imagination. Well, fast forward many years, and me and my wife and kids are staying in that house during a visit. My daughter is sleeping in my dad's office. As you may have already figured out, one night I'm heading down to get a snack. I look down that hallway as I pass by it, and what do I see? My child standing there. Scared the crap out of me. Story 4. I was stalked by a mountain lion when I was young. My family was ahead of me, and I saw it in a tree watching me. I yelled forward to my parents and looked back, and it was gone. I was under 10 at the time, and I'm almost 40 now. I don't even know if it was real anymore. Commenter. My dad and I were hiking once. I was 15 or 16, I believe. All of a sudden, every hair on the back of my neck stood at full attention, and I felt like I was going to throw up. I said, "Dad, I really think we should go back to the van." His reply still makes my skin crawl. He simply looked at me and said, "Me too. That scared me more than anything. Superman isn't supposed to be afraid." There was a news report the next day of a hiker being attacked by a mountain lion on the same trail we were on, just a little farther up from the parking area. We both have no doubt that was what we both subconsciously sensed. Commenter 2. It is so weird to read this comment right now. Yesterday, I did some hiking alone to check out some of the aspens off the beaten path in CO. I did a couple different short hikes, but had seen another trailhead as I passed on my way there, so decided to check it out before I headed back. I checked the trail map at the start and saw it was just 2 miles up to where the trail split, so I decided to go that far at least to check it out. It was a gorgeous hike, and hardly any people there, so really peaceful. When I got to where the trail split, I stopped and drank some water and ate a snack, and then I just got the weirdest feeling that I was being watched, so I was constantly looking over my shoulder while sitting there. At that point, the wind came up a bit too, so all the aspens were dropping leaves everywhere and some clouds were building up, so I decided to head back. But for the whole rest of my hike back, I had the same feeling you were describing. Every hair on my body was standing on end, and I felt like every sense I had was working overtime, and just felt the overwhelming urge to get back to the road. With all the leaves blowing off the trees, I kept thinking I was hearing something behind me, and I was constantly looking around and stopped a couple times to take a look at my surroundings because I was just convinced there was something there, but never saw anything. The whole time, I'm just thinking that I really wish I had brought my trekking poles for some sense of security if something comes at me. It was just so weird that for like 4 or 5 hours of my day hiking, it was so peaceful and gorgeous, and I had no real thoughts of any danger of any kind. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of this hike, which is maybe the prettiest area I visited, I started feeling super anxious for no reason I could discern at all. Anyway, I made it back and it was all good. Saw some great views and got some good pictures. But then today I'm talking to a couple friends who have lived in the area way longer, and they were telling me how that trail is known mountain lion country, and multiple people with dogs have had issues with them. Death sent a chill down my spine again because I just figured I was being paranoid at the time, but who knows. Anyway, sorry for the long post, but yeah, it's just crazy. I just had that experience yesterday, then was talking about it today with friends, then see a post on Reddit about it, so figured I'd share. Story 5. I was at the airport and saw a businessman with a carry-on wheelie bag get off the escalator. He turned the corner, broke into a sprint carrying the bag by its small strap handle on top. He swung the bag forward and let go of the strap handle. While it was in midair, he grabbed the currently unextended extending handle, pressed the button, and on the backswing extended the handle and landed it on its wheels and continued sprinting, all without breaking stride. Story 6. I saw one of the modified stealth helicopters that were used in the Bin Laden raid. I used to live near McChord Air Force Base growing up. During the 90s, we'd occasionally see a F-117 or B-2 flying during the day. But one night in 09 or 10, I was hanging out on the shore of a lake doing teenage things and heard something weird. I was along a flight path and nearest to the aforementioned airbase, so I was used to planes and helicopters flying past. I'm familiar with what Chinooks and Mi-60s sound like, but this was different. Something was off. That's when I saw two helicopters with normal lights break through the tree line, I assume Apache. But it was dark, and I'm just guessing there. However, between them was a third helicopter with no lights at all, almost like the other two were escorting it. I know it's incredibly rare for any aircraft to be granted permission to fly with no lights. And again, it sounded weird. I could differentiate between the normal thwump thwump of the two escorts and the mysterious third craft that had a much more muffled thwip thwip. Anyways, in 2011, SEAL Team 6 crashed one of their modified stealth helicopters during the Bin Laden raid, and they had to acknowledge that the Comanche program wasn't as dead as we were led to believe. Ever since then, I've been convinced that's what I saw that night a few years prior. Commenter. I grew up about 30 miles from Edwards AFB and saw all kinds of aircraft on the daily. Helicopter blades, sonic booms, jets screaming, contrails crisscrossing the entire sky were normal. Those flat, black, pointy planes I started noticing in the mid-'80s were a little different. But my 10-year-old self was way more into the space shuttle being towed down the HWY about 20 miles to where it was going to be loaded onto the back of a 747 to ride back to Florida. Cool things abound in the Mojave Desert. Lots of things that like to go fast, too. Story 7. Back in 1995, I was sitting on the beach in Durban, South Africa, with a bunch of mates after a night out. The sun was just starting to come up, and a dolphin launched itself out of water. For less than a second, it was silhouetted in front of the rising sun, and then it was gone. Nobody else saw it, but it is an image that is burnt into my mind and will no doubt stay with me for the rest of my life. Story 8. Two foxes ice skating on a frozen pond. My mom and brother saw it too. We watched for a good 10 minutes or more. Sometimes on hind legs, sometimes not. But they were definitely playing together and enjoying sliding around. Commenter. Foxes like to play. I've seen some repeatedly running up a small bank and then wriggling, rolling down it like kids. And another that stole a dog's squeaky toy and was throwing it around. My dog ran off and she was very much the type who'd come back eventually, but not a second sooner than she wanted. Someone knocked on our door and told us to go up the street to the pond. So we did. My dog was running and chasing a deer in Tay Pond. After a moment, they switched and the deer chased my dog. It was super nuts and really cute, and of course I didn't have my camera, pre-cell phone days. Story 9. I once saw a cat walk up a street to a zebra crossing. Stop, look for cars, cross, then walk down in the same direction on the other side of the road. Street smart cat. Added, many years ago, I had a black cat that stopped at the zebra crossing, waited until the light went green for him, and only then started walking again. A coworker of mine saw him do that, and no one else was around. She was in the car, waiting at the red light for traffic. Story 10. I was at my parents', sitting in the living room. They have a dog, and I was looking at her, waiting for her to give me her attention. After a few minutes, she looked at me. I wanted to teach her something unnecessary. My parents would wonder about later. I began to raise my eyebrows. She looked at me still. I did it more often. She was still very curiously looking at me. I went on raising my eyebrows over and over again for at least a few minutes. After staring at me for a really long time, she suddenly raised her eyebrows. I found it so funny and couldn't believe. She really copied me. When I told my family, no one believed me, and my parents' dog would not do it again. This was 3 years ago, and from time to time, I sit in front of her, raising my eyebrows. But nothing. Commenter. What's funny about this is if you look, wild canines like wolves and coyotes don't even have the ability to move their eyebrows. And their eyes are more to the side of their heads than the front, like ours and our pets. The idea seems to be adaptation over thousands of generations of dogs, to be more expressive and relatable to their human counterparts. Story 11. Went jogging at 5 a.m., stopped to say a prayer at a statue in front of the church. There was an old lady praying too, so I stopped by her side, closed my eyes, and then I heard the old lady crying, so I opened my eyes to check, and she was nowhere to be found. So I thought I'd imagined her or something and started jogging again, only to hear something in the back. So I turned back and looked, and there she is staring at me. and I ran as fast as I could. Most intense jog ID ever had. The commenter. This made me distinctly uncomfortable, huh? Story 12. Babysitting my brother's 1-year-old twins. Both have a couple of words, but not anything close to a sentence. Mom, dad, cow, he sort of thing. One of the kids grabbed my phone off the floor and I asked for it back. He said, "Would you like your phone back?" pretty perfectly. I said, "Yes, please," and he handed it me. No one believes me. Commenter. I can remember my early childhood, like being in diapers still. Remember my crib and stuff. I remember being able to understand what people were saying, but not being able to talk other than the usual mumblings of a kid that age. Me too. I'm 63 now, and one of my earliest memories is of Kennedy being shot. My mother was hysterical and saying, "Oh, honey, I know you're too little to understand, but that man is our president and some bad man shot him." I was unable to tell her that I understood because my dad watched the news every night, and I knew we lived in something called a country, and I knew he was in charge of it. That's all I understood, but I understood that much. Story 13. This happened years ago. My wife and I were moving cross-country in the U.S., and we'd spent a couple nights at her grandparents' place in Topeka, Kansas, which is on the far east side of the state. We left after a couple days of snow. It was a little cloudy, but there was no fog, and we were driving across the width of Kansas to Colorado, where we'd be staying with Asterisk, my Asterisk grandma, for a couple days. Less than 5 miles outside Topeka, we were swallowed by the thickest, densest fog I've ever experienced, including when I regularly drove through fog-heavy Half Moon Bay in California. There was no one on our side of the highway, and no one was coming the other direction, for hours. For the first 3-4 hours, maybe one car passed, going the other direction. It was just thick, thick fog. We pulled aside once, not even to get gas, just to get snacks and to use the restroom, and the gas station was lit up. But there were no cars parked around it, and we could see inside, and there were no people inside. We watched for about 10-15 minutes. There were no signs of life. We ended up just leaving because it was so eerie. I cannot express enough how empty it was. When we talk about it, we usually call it Silent Kansas, after the Silent Hill games, because there was just nothing but the thick fog and a sense of foreboding. We drove for hours across Kansas, and the fog did not lift or lessen, and we did not see another living being. There were no signs, which I know are usually there, for gas stations and restaurants. It was just empty, nothingness in the fog. And then we crossed the state border into Colorado, and within like 2 miles, before even hitting the mountains, so we were at the same altitude as we'd been before hitting Colorado, the fog was gone, the sky was clear and blue, and there were multiple cars on the highway going both directions. We both experienced it, but we will never be able to prove it happened, because it was before the era of ubiquitous smartphones, and neither of us had the ability to record it at the time. It remains one of the most terrifying and inexplicable experiences I've ever had. Story 14. An entirely white owl. In Brazil, Atlantic Forest. Arriving home 3 a.m., lived just beside a closed forest area. The owl was on the sidewalk. Stopped to photograph, but it flew away. Probably albino or leucistic. Never saw it again. Story 15. 2012, I lived in the Midwest near an Air Force base. I delivered newspapers in the early morning hours to make extra money. 4 o'clock one morning, a drone starts shadowing me on my route. Not a tiny drone like today. This f***er was big, and it was way up in the air. I saw it through my sunroof. I could hear it humming. It followed me for blocks. I got out of my car to make a porch delivery and looked up at it, and it flew off. Still creeps me out. Commenter, or just training. I was in southern Arizona training to fly drones. One of the assignments was to simply follow a vehicle from about 7,000 feet up. Just in case you're worried, the training doctrine demands that we destroy any recordings at the end of the training day. So while I'm up there following an SUV, it pulls over and into a little stand of trees. I see another vehicle start up, and a handful of people get out of the new vehicle and get the unloading stuff from the original car. So we called border control and gave the location. They found a bunch of substances. Pretty intense and rewarding. Story 16. At work on the railroad, going down the main line at 40 miles per hour, middle of the day, middle of the woods. Watched a massive thing leap from one tree line to the other, completely cleared a span of about 30 feet without touching the ballast. It was on all fours and muscular, bear-shaped but much bigger, and its skin was fleshy pink. I jumped out of my seat when I saw it. My engineer didn't, as he was looking at me while talking. Told him what I saw, described it expecting to be given shit about it. To my surprise, he told me 2 weeks before a different conductor he was working with saw the same thing in right the same area. Never heard another thing about it. Story 17. I was driving down a long stretch of road around 12:01 a.m. on either side, just short grass and metal fences. I saw a man in a suit with a suitcase walking the opposite way I was driving. Thinking how odd this was, I looked in my rearview mirror, and poof, no man, he vanished with nowhere to hide. I'm 99% sure I saw a ghost. Commenter. When I was like 4, I was at my grandma's house and wandered off into her bedroom and met an old lady with dyed purple hair sitting on the bed. I vividly remember her and her purple hair. She introduced herself as my great-grandma Adriana. We said a few words back and forth, and then I wandered off again and kind of forgot about it. Years later, I'm 16 at my grandma's house, and I notice a picture of her with her purple hair on the wall. I remembered the moment from when I was young and said, "Hey, that's my great-grandma Adriana." And my mom says, "Yeah, how do you know that?" And I told her that I met her when I was little and remember her specifically by her purple hair. My mom, confused, says, "She always dyed her hair purple because she hated when it went gray, but she died before you were born." Story 18. I'm counting déjà vus. I have lots of those. I've seen things happen before, and when the event is happening, I'm 100% sure I've seen that exact situation play before. Story 19. As a child, I was in the car with my mother driving on the highway as the sun was coming up. I looked at the skyline above the trees and clearly saw a meteor of catastrophic proportions slowly falling from right to left, orange and on fire with a trail. It disappeared behind the tree line after about 5 seconds. It was obviously some sort of illusion, as it was absolutely massive and would have been devastating. My mom didn't see it. Story 20. I was walking in downtown Des Moines on my lunch break and saw a homeless man with a cigarette in his mouth with really bad diarrhea run up to 2 guys in business suits and ask them something. I couldn't tell what they were saying. Then I saw the 2 businessmen grab each leg of the homeless man and lift him up onto a trash can where he took the most explosive and disgusting shit I have ever heard into the hole on the top. Story 21. My aunt and a hooded figure standing at the foot of my bed 10 hours after her funeral. I felt a sense of clam in just knowing that she was checking on me before she goes. Commenter. My grandpa stopped by to visit me in a dream shortly after he passed. He apologized for not remembering me on my last visit to see him, but he loved me and was proud of me. He then gave me a big hug and said this was the goodbye he wasn't able to give me in life. I know it was a dream, but it was absolutely something he would have said pre-dementia, so I cherish the memory of the dream. Story 22. A lady in white on the side of the road around 2 a.m. in rural New Jersey. All white, long dress. The other 2 people in the car didn't see her. I turned back to look, saw nothing. Story 23. When I was a kid, probably 12 years old, I was out cycling without my phone. While I was riding over a bridge in the countryside, I saw something huge down by the riverbed. I stopped, got closer, and I swear to God it was a 2-meter, CCA 7 feet, long leech or a worm or something on the ground, slowly moving towards the river. I rushed home to get my phone to take a photo, but by the time I got back, it was gone. I still have no idea what the hell that was or where it ended up going, but it was there that day 10 years ago. Edit. Just for reference, the river itself is only 5 meters wide and in parts narrower. For reference, it's in Croatia, not a humid tropical country where something like this might realistically happen. It couldn't have been a snake, because for one, we don't have big snakes here and it didn't slither like a snake. It squished itself and then extended like a worm does. Story 24. 1. The ghost of a war of 1812 era in broad daylight in my mom's backyard when I was about 35. Yes, I was wide awake. I was reading in a lounge chair. He was only there long enough for me to say, "Oh, you startled me." He wasn't frightening, and by the time my brain clued in, he was gone. The house was in Toronto, and he was gazing in the direction of Grenadier Pond. He looked troubled, like he had a lot on his mind. To this day, I wish I knew exactly who he was. 2. A crow, walking along the sidewalk, stopping at the corner and actually looking both ways before crossing the street. There wasn't even any traffic. 3. A fairy. Yes, a fairy. I was walking along a path next to a creek near my house, and I saw this thin, brownish humanoid figure about 6 or 7 inches tall jump onto a tree branch about 10 feet away from me. But when I tried to actually look at it, it was like I couldn't focus my eyes on it or even on just that part of the tree. I was unnerved and got the heck out of there. I used to go there often for walks, and I never had an experience like that before or since. Story 25. Came back from dinner with my then girlfriend, now wife, and our friend to friend's house. Friend said, "Shh," and we crept up to the window next to the front door. Her chocolate lab was laying asleep on the couch that he wasn't allowed on. She jiggled the doorknob for a few seconds before unloading the door and opening it. We went in to find the dog across the room in his dog bed, pretending to be asleep. She goes over and wakes him up. He looks at all of us like he's just woken up and sleepily starts wagging his tail and gets up and stretches. One of the funniest things I've ever seen and proof that he was smarter than half the humans I've met in my life. If we had that on camera, we'd have won the $100K on AFHV for sure. Story 26. My girlfriend's dead ex-husband. I was sleeping in her spare bedroom because she was sick. I felt something standing over me. I felt the presence. When I opened my eyes to look, he poked me in the ribs. I knew what he looked like from pictures and later found out his ashes were in the same room I was in. That dead guy. Story 27. A toddler fighting a cat outside of my apartment building at 3 a.m. I was hearing weird cat noises, so I checked it out from my window. There the kid was, literally fighting for his life. I ran downstairs to just find the cat, no toddler. Called the police, searched, nothing. Story 28. I saw a fracture in this dimension. I was waiting for the bus. I turned my head and saw the bus approach with a white pickup in front of it, so I looked forward and stood up. I turned my head again to wave the bus down, and there was a vertical line extending to infinity, like looking at the edge of a piece of glass. I thought my vision was going weird, and I was going to have a stroke or something, but I was perfectly fine. The bus drove through the line, and the line disappeared, but the pickup was gone. I looked up and down the street, but there was no sign of the pickup. There were no turnoffs or side streets, nothing. I got on the bus and looked out of every window as I walked down the aisle. The pickup was nowhere to be seen. Story 29. Possible W for some people. Mentions of death. When I was 7 or 8, I was traveling with my parents abroad, and we were basically in the middle of nowhere in North Africa, traveling through some mountains on our way to some place or other. I don't remember exactly where or why. All I knew is it was way too early in the morning for little me, and I was dozing against the car window while my parents chatted about this or that. Eventually, my dad pulled over someplace that my mom really wanted to stop at. A small building that had a bunch of rugs and carpets laid out front. They woke me up and had me go inside with them, but I quickly grew bored and asked to go back to the car to nap or do something more fun. My dad said yes, and I left, but I didn't go to the car. I heard chickens and animals. So I went around the back of the building and found a flock of chickens just chilling. A cat and her kittens, and little me was excited. And I remember petting the mama cat and one of the little ones that wasn't scared of me, even letting me pick it up. That's when I noticed something else. A distance away between the bushes was what looked like a person hanging from a tree. I remember thinking how weird they looked because their feet weren't on the ground and they weren't standing on anything. So how could they be so high up? I put the kitten back down and I ran back to the car and got in. My parents joined me a bit later and I asked them about what I saw. They immediately told me I must have been still sleepy and imagined it. Or maybe I saw some clothes hanging there and thought it was a person. Or maybe it was a dead tree branch. They kept talking over me and telling me I was wrong, so I just accepted it. It took me a few years to remember that again, and I'm 100% sure about what I saw. Story 30. My cat was meowing strangely in my kitchen at night, and I went over and there was some sort of orange bioluminescent glowing creature that was about the size of a coin. I chased it across the floor of my living room, and at one point it crawled over my hand and clung on my finger briefly and felt like a mixture of an arachnid and an amphibian somehow. I froze and didn't know what to do, and then it kept going. It got away into some junk in my foyer, and I couldn't find it. A few minutes later, I saw 2 green glowing dots like laser pointers on the wall slowly following each other from the living room into the foyer, and then stopped and one faded out, and then the other faded out. To this day, I have no idea why that happened, but I remember it vividly, and no one believes me, and I would be inclined to think I was crazy if my cat hadn't seen the creature first. Story 31. I saw what I can only describe as seeing a star dying. Sometime back before 2015, not exactly sure when, my brother had a friend over for a sleepover. Because of this, we were sleeping in the living room that night. We lived out in the country, so the night sky was very clear and our living room had very large windows facing away from the urban glow. I couldn't sleep, so I was just staring out at the stars. Then I saw one of the stars I was looking at erupt. It formed a large, thick ring that expanded to several times its original size. Then it very quickly stopped, and then collapsed back in on itself and vanished. Honestly, I know it doesn't make any sense for it to have really been a star exploding and then collapsing, but that's what it looked like. I still have no idea what it really was. Story 32. I slept on the sofa at a friend's house. Woke up and saw someone sitting on the chair. The lights were off, but it was quite bright from the streetlights. I thought it was his dad, so I said, "Hello, Mr. X. What are you doing up?" He didn't respond to anything I said. He had his legs crossed and was bouncing his leg and just staring mindlessly. I went upstairs and woke up my friend and told him that his dad or some FKR was downstairs and being weird. He was mad and told me to f off. Now at no point did I think ghost. I just thought it was someone in the house being an arsehole. So I just went back to sleep. This guy just sat there. When I woke up, everyone was laughing at me. I still just thought it was just some prank. He had older brothers, so I thought maybe one of his friends or some arsehole. I was like, haha, okay, hilarious. You got me. It was only when his dad came down and said no one was downstairs and that he sometimes slept downstairs and heard things in the kitchen that I realized I saw a f***ing ghost. Story 33. July 1976, I saw a UFO in the sky. It was like a red dot that zipped across the whole of the night sky in seconds. It did this a couple of times and disappeared. Story 34. A beautiful waterfall deep in a forest. I swear it was there. But when I went back, maybe a year later, it was just a big wall made of that fake grass with the highway above it. But I could swear it was a gigantic waterfall. Story 35. I mean, I can't prove it, but I once saw a woman pull up to a drive-through window with no arms. When I handed her her 2 drinks, she grabbed them one at a time between her neck and collarbone. She moved them each to a cup holder, grabbed the straws between her big and second toe, leaned back, put it in gear, and drove off with 1 foot on the wheel. And when I say no arms, I'm talking no arms. Her torso just ends at the shoulder. I would never have believed it if I had not seen it myself. Talked to some coworkers and they knew all about her. Apparently, she has an Instagram and is a painter. Really humbled the f out of me and made me realize I take for granted a lot of shit and bitch about insignificant shit a lot. Story 36. My uncle walking right before he died. My uncle was a quadriplegic my entire life. He was in an accident while I was in utero. I was very fond of him. He was in the hospital very ill, and I was at home states away. I looked at the head of my bed and saw him walk in my room, wave and walk out. He was so chill about it, it didn't dawn on me what I saw. My mom called me in hysterics about an hour later, telling me he died. Everyone said it was a shame I didn't know him before the accident or see him standing. I see most of our family members right before the pass, as did my great aunt. The most heartbreaking one was hearing her say, "I'm hard of hearing, so that makes it really strange. It's your turn, old girl. You can do it." Old girl and weird girl were her nicknames for me. Story 37. Okay. When I was 10, my dad passed away. A few months later, I was laying in bed with my bedroom light off, but the hallway light on and the door open. I'm nearly asleep when I look up and there's a man standing in my doorway. He didn't walk into the doorway. One moment he wasn't there. The next, he was. He was almost as tall as the door. I couldn't make out any details. He formed a man-shaped silhouette in my doorway. I could see that he was wearing a tall, wide-brimmed hat, like a top hat, and I could see bright, almost glowing yellow eyes. I was 10, going on 11, so naturally this terrified the f*** out of me. I pulled the blanket over my head. When I convinced myself I was dreaming, I pulled the blanket down. His face was inches from mine, hovering over me as if he were levitating just above me. I saw his eyes closer now, just peering into me. I don't remember how the rest of the night went. A few years go by, and I randomly tell the story to my mom. As I tell it, she gets this look. Then she says, "So you saw him too?" Edit to add more. My mom and I talked about it, and she told me she had seen a man wearing a top hat and what looked like a cloak or cape outside that night. She only saw him for a moment. He was standing in the yard, looking at the house. But when she went to get her gun, he disappeared. She said she thought she was hallucinating. Story 38. During the killer clown craze / sightings during 2016. I was in my backyard while my dad was on the grill cooking food. My backyard connects to the woods and was very spacious, so I would often be in the backyard just hanging out. My dad left the grill and went inside to get something, so I was in the yard by myself. As soon as he went inside, I saw 3 people with scary clown masks and backpacks just walking through the woods very close to the beginning of my property. They were at least 8 feet away from me. Well, they ended up seeing me and stopped in their tracks and just stared at me for what felt like an eternity, but was probably 5 seconds with no words being exchanged whatsoever. Then one of them went up to the other clown, who happened to probably be a girl because they had long hair, and just started to kiss and make out with through the mask for about 10 seconds. When they were done, they just walked away waving bye at me, and I never saw them again. I told my dad, and he thought I was full of bees, and I was joking and joining in on the killer clown trend. The next day, I went to school and told every single one of my friends, which none of them believed me. They kept asking questions like, "Do you have a picture? Do you have security footage?" To which I responded no to all of them. And well, they ended up not believing my encounter with those 3 people in clown masks. Tell doctor I saw 3 people in clown masks in my backyard making out during the 2016 killer clown craze. Story 39, not a believer in anything supernatural, not religious, nothing like that. However, I was driving back from San Francisco one night to a friend's house. It was about 3:30 a.m. He lives in a sort of forested neighborhood in the East Bay, and the entrance to where he lives is sort tucked behind a small town and has a 1-lane road leading into it. I pull off the main road onto this 1 lane, and right before you enter, there's a strange crosswalk that is lit on a street otherwise devoid of streetlights. As I'm approaching the crosswalk, I notice there is someone standing there waiting to cross. So while it's weird to see someone out this late, I, of course, stop and let them cross. After they do, I look at them as I'm passing, and as I perceived their face, they weren't human. Large, dark black eyes, no facial features otherwise. They stared at me as I drove past. I got as good of a look as you can get glancing at someone as you drive past them. And years later, the moment still terrifies me. The other strange thing, that crosswalk itself is odd as it leads to nowhere. The other side is just dense trees, no real path or houses or anything. I've tried to rationalize. Maybe they were disfigured and preferred to be out at night when less people are around. And while I still lean towards some sort of rational explanation, I can't shake the feeling that I saw something the universe didn't mean for me to see. Story 40. 1. When I was very little, my mom took me with her to a strange lady's house. The lady was the perfect image of a cartoon fortune teller. I remember her dimly lit but colorful home and clothes, her hoop earrings, the smell of incense. She gave me a picture book called Hooray for Captain Jane. We never went there again. Since I was little, I never thought about it much. Much later, I asked Mom who that was, and she had no idea what I was talking about. Probably her hippie pot dealer or something, but it's a surreal memory that I treasure. I had the book for many years. 2. Riding my bike down the street, 11 years old in my neighborhood, on a sunny afternoon. On the other sidewalk in the other direction, a Latino man is walking past. Long, silky black hair, shirtless, his chest and arms covered in what could only be blood. Nobody else was around. He didn't look at me. I pretended I did not see and kept going on my way. 3. I saw an extremely tall dust devil on a clear day over a business park in the middle of town. I was a passenger traveling down an elevated highway about half-mile away from it. This was just when I had my first smartphone, so I did not have the instinct to instantly pull it out and take video. I was shocked there were no damage reports or footage of it that evening, and kick myself to this day for not capturing it. Story 41. I saw about 6 or 7 whooping cranes fly over me into Montana. I heard them first and thought they were strange-sounding sandhill cranes, but their white color and red markings on some of them distinguished them. I'm a birder and biologist, so I am confident that what they were. I found out one of their migratory routes indeed brings them over into Montana. Story 42. My 10-year daughter and I were watching TV, and our dog was sleeping on the floor to the left. On our right, we both saw a transparent version of him running down the stairs. My daughter looked at me, and I asked her what she saw. It was the same thing I saw, so I know I didn't imagine it. Story 43. I swear I saw a lion from a hot air balloon flying over Luxor, Egypt. I got a picture, but this was back in 2009 on a digital camera, so not the greatest quality. Opinions are split. It's definitely a large animal. It doesn't look like a donkey or horse, but a lion just seems impossible. Story 44. A UFO. It was maybe 2010. It was like a green sphere. If you search the web, you will find fake videos with exactly what I saw. But my eyes are real. I actually saw the fake UFO in real life. It was daytime. Story 45. When I was really young, at night, each time I closed my eyes, I would see what appeared to be the universe. Constellations, stars, beautiful space dust. Story 46. I would like to start by saying I know what I saw. I saw a big cat, like Panther, in Australia. I looked at it for a long time trying to figure out what it was before it ran away. It had the profile of a cat, and ran like a cat, and had a long fat tail. I know what I saw. Story 47. I saw a raccoon ride a deer. I don't think it was consensual, kind of like an 8-second bull ride as it sprang out of a dumpster and landed on a doe. Both disappeared into the woods. I still wonder how long that little bastard hung on. Story 48. I've had my sight shift in a forest. One moment I was sitting peacefully with my BF enjoying my surroundings. The next, the forest was crawling with life, like the noises of a lively gathering, with see-through beings crawling all over. It was just a split second, but reminded me of the stories of dryads and fae in general. And while my sight shifted back when my BF started talking to me, that's not where the experience ended. The next 15 minutes we heard the rustling of leaves cascade, first far away near the edge of the forest, and so closer and closer to us. Then someone would walk by us, and the leaves to the other side would rustle. It felt like an intruder alert system. This happened with several bypassers. That was one of the most memorable days I've ever had in the forest. Like I was accidentally part of another world, for a moment. Story 49. I saw the ghost of a keyboardist friend about 6 months after he passed in 2019, sitting in the tour bus, waiting for the show. I saw him in the reflection of the window. When I looked at the seat, he wasn't there. When I looked back at the window, he was gone. Try to explain that to the rest of the band. Story 50. 3 years ago, heading to work summer evening blue skies, park near mine was full of families and kids playing. As I looked in the middle of the football field, there was suddenly nobody there. It was silent, too. There was a big glossy box vehicle thing. The size of a van looked like a massive iPod case. That's my nearest description. It had an oval-shaped hole and the inside was blue, looked like neon blue light. And outside it, there were 3 men in white jumpsuits with black trim, looked like the Tesla spacesuits. 2 had their helmets on, and the other was holding his. He was a heavily tanned white male with short golden blonde hair. They were looking around their feet for something they had lost. I was staring at them while walking. They all turned to look at me. So I looked away, and when I looked back, it had gone. It was a noise-filled park again, with around 20-plus kids playing football in that exact place. freaked me out. Story 51. Two juvenile Bigfoot Sasquatch chasing each other across a mountain road about 8 miles from the nearest town at 3:10 a.m. They were not bears, but looked like apes. This was at the SW base of MT St. Helens in Way State about 20 years ago. Story 52. I've posted this story a few times on Reddit, but when I was about 8, around a 96-ish I think, I saw a weird being in my dad's girlfriend's house. I was spending the night with my sister over there and had to get up to pee. I saw a light on in the living room, and it was this thing rocking in her rocking chair. It was like the shape of a human, but completely made of white light. No features, no face. Just bright white light. It reflected off the windows and everything. Even though it didn't have a face, I felt it look at me and had the distinct impression that it felt surprised or caught. I stared at it for a minute, decided in a very kid-like way, well, this, and went ahead to the bathroom. When I was done, the thing was gone, and everything was dark again. Never seen anything like it before or since, but it was there, and so was I. Story 53. I've had a few. A UFO. It looked like a chrome ball just hovering over the ocean. Definitely not a helicopter or anything like that. Then as I was watching it suddenly shot away and vanished out of sight at impossible speed. Had a large ship with Asian writing on it try to ram my boat. This was a large ship, maybe 50 m long. I was in my 5M fishing boat. We were going to cross paths. I waited back to allow it to cross well in front of me, and it turned hard right and would have hit me if I hadn't maneuvered out of the way. Boats like this don't just change course like that. I had someone with me, and I still sometimes ask him if it happened because it feels like it didn't. Again, out on my boat, almost got hit by a meteorite. It passed by about 15 m from me. It sounded like a blowtorch or a flamethrower. It was pretty cool to see. Story 54. While sitting in a parking lot facing a major street, I saw a woman running in regular clothes like she was scared. Then a car pull up, a person jumps out, grabs her ponytail, punches her in the face, picks her limp body up and puts her into the back seat and drives off. I called the police. They told me all dispatchers are at a do-I check, and since I didn't have a license plate, they couldn't be of any more help. It's been 20 years, and I think about this situation often, and now wonder, did it happen? I know it did, but it's just insane to have witnessed. Story 55. I had an experience with a ghost as a teen, 15. Our backyard dipped into the ravine with the creek below, and that winter, a child had drowned in the creek. They were digging through the ice in several spots downstream where they thought his body might have gotten stuck, and they eventually found him downstream from where I lived. My bedroom faced the back of the house, and I would always look at the ravine one last time before closing my curtains and going to bed. One of those nights, after they'd finished searching for the day, I looked out the window as usual and saw the form of someone smaller than me looking in. I yanked the curtains shut and jumped under my blankets. When I told my mother the next day, she was surprised as she'd felt something too. They found his body shortly after that. Of course, I always have reasonable doubt towards ghost encounters, and the chances of proving they exist are slim, but dang it, it sure felt real. Story 56. In July 2019, around the Gilroy-CA area, my now husband and I were driving along a split highway where the opposite way was more elevated, and there was a grass median in between. As we were driving, we watched a red SUV, like a burgundy Tahoe or something, hit a car, flip 1 or 2 times over the median, land on its wheels, and start driving the direction we were going. He started fishtailing like crazy because his car was obviously f***ed up, so my husband sped past so we didn't get caught by anything. I swear I saw his face and insane eyes as he was flipping onto our lanes. It happened so fast, and I don't like to look at my phone a lot in the car BC of headaches, so we don't have any proof. But we both saw it and agree it's the craziest thing we've seen. There had to be some sort of wreck or something after, but I can't find any reports or articles or anything about it. Story 57 was brought to a home by a friend to fix a PC in Ireland in a border town. Entered the cottage living room. On the old sofa was a case stuffed full of cash. Looked around, there was a fairly used-looking rocket launcher behind the door we had come through from Hall. I was there as a young IT guy to repair a slow machine that I later found out was being used for an unofficial bookie racket and possible money transfer setup. I did my job, said little while there, pleasant words, asked few questions, and got the hell out ASAP. I told my friend never to bring me back there again. The owner of the cottage, years later, was arrested for laundering money for a Republican army fighting British soldiers in the north of Ireland. Story 58. A cougar. I was very young and outside alone at my nan's house. Her house was kind of nestled in the woods by a creek. I was walking back to the house after the dinner's ready call, but heard something behind me, so I stopped and turned around, and it was a big cat staring at me. I stood there frozen staring back at it, and then my dad came outside, and so I turned back towards the house, and when I turned back around to see the cat again, it was already gone. I tried to explain to my dad that I seen a cat, but they thought I was talking about a small house cat. I was so young I couldn't properly explain it. but it 100% was a cougar. Long tail kind of curled upwards, tan-colored, big paws. Story 59. I see shadow people on the regular. It started when I was a kid after Say. I have and do go to therapy sessions. I'm fairly certain that experience has led to my addictions and struggles. I swear I see this and would be comfortable with saying I saw them too. Edit. They are not more pronounced under the influence. This is to include alcohol, TIC, psilocybin, cocaine, or LSD. In most cases, they just seem to be there. In some, they seem to take an interest in others. They have only seemed to have taken an interest in me noticing them on one occasion. This has been going on for 40+ years. Story 60. When I was 5 or 6, family moved into a different house. For 4 months, my brother and I would scream and cry in the middle of the night, telling Mom we saw a man. I would look in the corner of my room where he would always stand. He wasn't mean, but he didn't look right, which scared me. My mom did some digging and ventured up in the roof and found a bed up there, and numerous other things as if someone was living there. We found out it was the last man who ever got hung in Australia, his hideout while running from authorities. We got out of that house pretty quickly. I still remember that man in the corner to this day, 33 years ago. Story 61. My dad's lucky number was 13. We built his coffin, and around 1 week after he passed, we went to buy the wood. We ended up needing 13 lengths in total, each priced at 13 pounds, with only 13 pieces in the yard. We were driving back, and then a car pulled in front of us on the motorway with the number plate Dad. Story 62. When I was around 11 years old, I had a sleepover with a friend. Middle of the night, he woke me up, and when my eyes opened, I saw a ghost behind him. Then right after I see this, he told me he just saw a ghost. We freaked out, then waited eyes wide open until the morning. When we got the courage to get out of bed, we decided to go into separate rooms and draw what we both just saw. Our drawings were insanely similar. We both saw the same long, wavy outfit, long, thin fingers, and most notably, a head without a face. Instead of a face, there were pronounced wrinkles. In that moment, I told myself, no matter what, never doubt what I just saw. Naturally, as the years pass, I doubt myself more and more, but I continue to remember telling myself not to. Story 63. The fox that lives in the graveyard near my house. Once while walking there in the daytime, once while sitting out at night, when it just ran across the grass and hopped up onto the fence like a cat and ran along it. Once out the front at twilight while I was tidying up. On one other occasion, my son saw it at the same time as me. And that's the only thing I've got to stop my wife teasing me about it being a figment of my imagination. Story 64. A grid in the sky. I know it sounds insane, but I was leaving work for my lunch break in 2021 and I looked up at the sky while walking to my car and saw a grid, like graphing paper. It stopped me dead in my tracks. I closed my eyes, opened them again, and it was still there. The grid was green and looked like it was faintly vibrating. Then I long blinked again and it was gone. It felt like I saw a glimpse of something I wasn't supposed to dot, maybe for a moment. My vibration aligned enough for me to see it, IDK, but I still think about it at least once a week. Story 65. A shipping container-sized chunk of rain hit the ground 15 feet in front of me. It was an extremely hot, sunny summer day in southern Maryland, and it came out of nowhere. But it was so hot out, it somehow nearly immediately evaporated from the grass, so I really couldn't even verify for myself that it actually happened, but I saw and heard it. Location was on a farm in mowed grass, so no neighbors or anything for an 1/8 mile minimum. No clouds, no planes. It didn't rain before or after the event that day. Just a single chunk. Story 66. I was at a music festival in the southeastern part of the Ozarks in C, Missouri. Mind you, F. E. Leonard Wood was relatively nearby, as the U.S. military can cover a lot of ground pretty quickly. This will come into play in just a moment. I looked up while the headliners were jamming and noodling to no end. As I stared skyward, I noticed a triangle hovering. It had 3 orange points. It was not moving. I also saw tons of Chinese lanterns. Definitely not them. I've seen quite a bit of footage online that corroborates exactly with what I was witness to. My guess is military tech with some crazy tech makers. Story 67. I was young, maybe 6. Was being picked up from a friend's house and the mothers were chatting in the doorway. I looked at my mother, and behind her in the sky, a meteor was coming down. Or something. Maybe space junk. Not just a shooting star, but a main piece that was disintegrating with lots of little pieces coming off it. I kept trying to tell my mother, but she was busy in conversation and gave me "the grown-ups are talking, be quiet" line. Story 68. I saw water move from one cup to the other when I was a small kid. I decided to try my hand at magic and determined to magically make the water change cups without touching them. I did the whole abracadabra thing and really focused my will and everything. I swear it worked. Sadly, I was alone and was never able to repeat the trick. Obviously, my will was so strong that I simply flipped the short-term memory of which cup the water had been in to begin with. Because I was totally convinced and there's no other possible explanation other than to admit magic is real. Either that or the system admins of reality quickly noticed me exploiting a bug and immediately fixed it. Story 69. Not me, but my not quite 3 years old daughter. For a solid week in 1985, she kept talking about the angel at the end of her bed. Quite frankly, it freaked me the f out. The following Friday, we had a house fire and she died in her bed. Story 70. I was walking out of work near Seattle Center and a spotted owl flew right by my head. I have never seen a spotted owl in Seattle or in the metro area. It was pretty f***ing cool. Story 71. I saw a star go out. A lay friend and I were hanging out stargazing and I saw a star seem to get a little brighter. While I was trying to point out it to him, it disappeared altogether. Story 72. UFO. Way back in the early 80s in Hong Kong. Showed as a bright red dot that just hovered in the sky. I thought it might be Mars. Then it moved faster than anything I've seen since and vanished into the distance. Story 73. I grew up in a less populated area, a 2-hour drive from Nellis AFB, Las Vegas. In 1988, we saw black triangle jet planes in the sky. I was a kid that was a military jet aficionado, and I couldn't identify the model. 2 years later, the military revels the F-117 Nighthawk, and it matches what I saw. Story 74. My cousin and I were playing Halo CE on the original Xbox when my character, the Master Chief, lost his helmet. We played split screen and I was run over by his vehicle, Warthog, with the wheels running over my character's head. The helmet disappeared, revealing a low poly, not very detailed head. To this day, we talk about the event and how no one believes us when we tell the story. Story 75. I once had a really eerie experience that I still can't explain. One night, while I was in my backyard, I saw a shadowy figure that looked almost human. It was tall and moved quickly before disappearing into the trees. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or an animal, but something about it felt different, almost supernatural. I never found any proof of what it was, but the memory still gives me chills. It left me questioning what's really out there in the dark. Story 76. On September 1st, 2017 or 2018, the classic Hershey's Kisses Christmas commercial, with the ringing bells, aired on some TV station. I never saw it again until the holiday season arrived. When I tell people, they never believe me, but I wish I had a cooler story to tell. Story 77. My dad's picture moving. He passed away 3 years ago, and there is a photo frame of him on the top of our cupboard. I swear I saw him move twice or so. He blinked, and another day he was looking at me when I was doing house chores. Every single time I pass by his photo, I feel a heavy weight. I might say in my chest, I told my mom, but she says that I just miss him so much. I do miss him, but I do know what I saw. Story 78. I heard a loud noise, almost like a train. Only I wasn't near civilization. I was camping, near a lake. I ran towards the sound and saw a several-story high whirlwind over the water. I fumbled for my phone but couldn't get the camera open before it dissipated. A few seconds later, rain fell from the sky on a perfectly clear day. Nobody saw it but me, and I have no proof. Story 79. When I was working on a survey crew before they started using GPS, I was a rodman. I was walking down a road to a corner point for a reading. This was in a rural area, heavily wooded area. About 30 feet in front of me, a black snake was crossing the road. It took up the entire width of the road. It had to be at least 10 feet long. Story 80. When I was 3 or 4 years old, we lived in a really flat area and the winds were quite strong. One day it was raining and we went shopping. I had my little umbrella and a strong wind lifted me up and carried me for like a few moments, which was probably 2 meters in distance. I was scared at first, but then I thought it was so cool. I told my parents right away, but no one believed me. I'm still convinced I flew like Mary Poppins. Story 81. I was at a beach at night and I saw a white light coming towards me, and at first it looked like a plane, but it was going super fast and suddenly it burst into a rainbow color and disappeared. I don't know if anyone else has seen something similar, but I've never seen anything like that again. Story 82. I was at my friend's house hanging out with him, his wife, and a few other guests. I'm quite sure I saw my friend's wife discreetly doing herself good under a blanket while laying on the couch. But nobody said anything, so I just ignored it. To this day, I'm convinced I wasn't the only one who saw it, but nobody spoke up because it was too awkward. She served dinner that night, and I made up some excuse for why I wasn't hungry. Story 83. UFO as a kid sometime around 1996. My friend and his father saw it too. It was stationary and spinning clockwise. It was oval-shaped. With binoculars, you could make out that it was a metallic object. We watched till it vanished behind some clouds. Story 84. I have a vivid memory from when I was around 5 years old of walking with my dad in the backyard of our house at night, then looking up at the sky and seeing huge tentacle-like things moving, covering most of the night sky. Very Lovecraftian, except I had never heard of Lovecraft at that age. It was probably a dream, but it got burned into my long-term memory. Story 85. Looking at the stars with my cousin when one started to move. Maybe a plane we hadn't noticed, right? Except it wasn't blinking, just a shining white dot. And then it took a 90-degree right turn, moved forward, and disappeared. We looked at each other and he said, "Never forget this because nobody but me is ever going to believe you." I was 13. Story 86. I was once driving in the hills in India, Shimla to Chandigarh. I saw a creature, four-legged, wearing white clothes and a lot of white body hair, just cross the road in a matter of less than a second. The good thing is that I had two other people with me who saw the same thing. Story 87. A normal Tuesday morning on my way to work, I saw a bird surfing on the back of a fish in the canal, and then suddenly, the fish attacked and ate the bird, and they both disappeared in the water. Story 88. I was sitting in my old living room, maybe 13 years ago, on my laptop. I don't know what it could possibly have been, but directly to my left, a blue light flew past me with a whooshing sound, almost like that sound a firework makes after it's gone off, and the blue light disintegrated like a meteor. It was broad daylight in the afternoon. Story 89. When I was a kid, my dad and I saw a shooting star that went from one side of the sky to the other. The fun, sad thing was, we were at his friend's party, and half the people who were in the house, completely unaware, were all professional astronomers from the nearby university. Story 90. My dad at my bedside with my great-grandpa, telling me he was okay now, not to be sad, and he was no longer hurting. Dad had died 2 weeks before, and Grandpa has died 12 years before that. I swear it happened, and he was there. And then I woke up. I was 38 at the time. Story 91. I saw garbage in my bin bubble like popcorn in a theater machine. Thought it was a varmint. Kicked it over, and nothing but garbage flew out. Looked inside. Nothing. Never before or since have I experienced such a thing. Story 92. Flying at 39000 feet over India, I saw an orange light moving on my right-hand side. My first officer saw it too. We contacted air traffic control to confirm there was another aircraft in our vicinity, but they said negative. Aircraft don't have orange lights either. Story 93. Lori Lightfoot at the grocery store. She was with a security guard, and I chuckled because it's Lori Lightfoot, and she saw and gave me a psychotic glare. Story 94. I saw a UFO while I was sitting on the beach with two of my friends. All three of us know what we saw was one, even though neither of them believe in aliens or ETS. Story 95. Early to mid-90s cess. My grandpa, my dad, and I were out doing some night fishing. We would always go straight across the lake to our night spot. Anyways, there is barely any light pollution, and I look up. I see stars moving and would make turns that human technology couldn't do. Story 96. I have seen an infinite rainbow. Rainstorm ended around 5 p.m. in the winter, so sun was setting earlier. Perfect light to have rainbows just follow the curve of the atmosphere well past the horizon. I lost count after 50. Story 97. A rat hopping along on its hind legs while carrying a whole slice of bread. Tripped over the bread, did a full somersault, kept the bread in its mouth, and carried on hopping without breaking pace. Story 98. A lightning storm with no thunder. It wasn't far away either, it was pretty close. Just no sound. No thunder, but there should have been cause. That's how lightning works. Bizarre.